Yeah. Welcome back to the fourth episode of Drafts with Jordan and Josh. I am one of your co-hosts at PFF_Jordan Plucker. I am here as always with the wonderful, talented, and professional at PFF_Josh, Mr. Josh Liskowitz. How you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing awesome. How are you doing, Jordan?
I am doing great. So just thrilled to be here with you today. You were making me laugh a lot. Sorry, before we started this, that stuff was not suitable for work, so we won't be sharing that part on the podcast. But again,
as it turns out, PFF_Josh is hashtag not good at intros. But I digress.
If we had a B-reel, the stuff that was just on it, hilarious. Moving on, Josh, so again, very excited to be here. You know, I told you before, today is actually the 12th anniversary of my return from deployment in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. Something I want to touch on a little bit later in the show, but again, just sort of feeling really fortunate to be done with all that part of my life and to be here talking the draft with you and talking about all this wonderful stuff that we have going on right now at Pro Football Focus. Some of these new subscriptions that are awesome. If you go to profootballfocus.com/subscriptions, you'll see that we have two new packages there. We have PFF Edge and we have PFF Elite. PFF Edge unlocks all premium articles across fantasy, DFS, and the NFL draft. You get PFF player grades, snap counts, blocking, and career grades. You get expert fantasy rankings. You get our draft pass that Josh and I work so hard on every day. You get Jeff Ratcliffe's weekly wide receiver and corner matchup charts, all kinds of stuff, PFF projected box scores. And then, Josh, why don't you tell them about PFF Elite?
Yeah, I really like the Elite package, and I'm not just saying that because I'm biased being a PFFer. If you're serious about football, if you're serious about fantasy sports, about fantasy football, you want to get the PFF Elite package. All the 2016 signature stats that everyone loves, that's in there. 2017 as well. The DFS optimizer that'll prepare you for your mock drafts this year, that's in there as well. Also, the player position tool. All kinds of great stuff in there, Jordan.
Oh yeah, and then we also had a winner last week in our contest, and we have a winner this week in our contest too. Josh, you want to talk about that?
Yeah. First off, the contest itself. If you leave us in iTunes a review, give us those 5 stars because that helps us out, of course. But you leave us a review. Include your email address, your Twitter handle. You have a shot at winning PFF Elite. That's a $200 value, so that's awesome. We've had winners 2 weeks in a row. This week, the winner is at Hitstick Mikey. Woo-hoo! So at Hitstick Mikey, congratulations. You are going to win all of your fantasy leagues this year.
Yes, Mikey.
And I invite anybody who knows at Hitstick Mikey to make sure that they leave a review in iTunes to try and win just like their buddy did. Mm-hmm. And B, you sign up for Edge and Elite as well because you're going to need it in order to beat at Hitstick Mikey.
Mm-hmm. Fear that man with all that knowledge he's got now. Yeah, I'm impressed. All right. So again, super excited about that. You guys leave us a review and you could win. Like you said, like Josh said, it's a $200 value. So that's pretty awesome to go ahead and win that, all just by leaving us a nice review for the show. All right, Josh, let's get into it, buddy. Let's get back to our study on these quarterbacks, top quarterbacks for the 2018 draft. If you're just catching up with us now, episode 1, we went over Darnold and Rosen. Episode 2, we went over Mayfield and Rudolph. Episode 3, we went over Jackson and Allen. This is episode 4, A New Hope. Or also the Apple Cup episode, however you want to call it. But we are going to talk about Washington State's Luke Falk and Washington's Jake Browning. And you do want to start us off with Luke Falk today, Josh?
Yeah, let's start out with him. We kind of know the pecking order. That was pretty clear with the first 6 guys that we looked at, but going in theme with the Star Wars reference, I think there's been a disturbance in the Force here because we were both really in awe of some of the things Luke Falk did on film, weren't we, Jordan?
Oh, yeah, totally. It was really impressive. I mean, again, like there's a lot of passing experience just in that offense because it's a throw first, throw second offense. But yeah, like you said, I mean, his tape, he was really starting to pop off on tape right away when we watched him.
Yeah, he was. Let's go through some of the stats first before we get into the specifics of how he looked on film. 61.2 adjusted completion percentage under pressure. That ranks 14th among returning FBS quarterbacks, not just the prospects. That's not just the top guys. That's everybody in FBS, so that's solid. 80.7 adjusted completion percentage with no pressure. That ranks 5th among returning FBS quarterbacks. And remember, they have what's really an awesome offensive line, 2 of the better tackles, at least statistically from last year. They're back. So they're going to be another strong offensive line, and I would expect that accuracy to improve or at least stay the same, which was at a very, very high level because of how good that line is at keeping him safe and away from pressure.
The one thing to note, though, is he is losing some talented wide receivers. You know, he's losing Gabe Marks on his right side, who's I think with the Jets now, and then River Craycraft, who is his talented slot receiver. So, I mean, he's still got some talent to work there, you know, and again, like you said, the offensive line is really talented. All those guys graded really well in our system. You know, I've mentioned before, they're sort of aided by really wide splits that can sort of identify rushers coming and, you know, and stunters coming and things like that. But they're, I mean, not to take anything away from them, they're all really talented guys. Falk is losing some weapons, so that will be, you know, one concern. If, you know, can he maintain that sort of statistical, you know, impressive statistics that he's been putting up and that impressive, you know, completion percentage. I mean, like you said, his adjusted completion percentage of 78 ranks number 4 among returning FBS quarterbacks.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we need to point out right away in terms of what we saw on film that makes it, again, interesting to see how he responds with a relatively young, inexperienced receiving core this year is the fact that he did so much last year post-snap in terms of making adjustments based on what the coverage was. He did a fantastic job of kind of understanding what the defense is trying to accomplish each play, where they were going to be, throwing his guys open to particular spots, and just really, again, making those adjustments based on what he was seeing in front of him. Along with that comes a sense of timing and chemistry that you have to have with your receivers. And I suspect that at least early on, that could be an issue as he develops with these guys and starts to work with them more. Obviously, he had a lot more time with Craycraft and Marks. I think that's probably going to hurt him a little bit, at least early on in the season. So I'm interested to see how that plays out, at least early on. I think talent-wise, I'm not so worried about that. I think those guys will step up. But I think there's going to be an adjustment period.
I mean, that's a really good point, Josh, because, I mean, one of the things that we had even noticed on film last year was that a lot of Falk's early interceptions came on like miscommunications or, you know, with his receivers or receiver errors and things like that. And that was with guys that he had been with for a while. So, so I think that's definitely probably going to rear its head a little bit, at least early on in the season as those guys get used to each other with everything. I mean, Falk could be throwing to some spots where there's no wide receiver there. You know, again, that happened a little bit at the beginning of the season last year. So, yeah, I think you're right. That's a really good point. I think that's probably going to happen somewhat to start the year this year.
Well, that was his first 3 picks last year. We went through them, and really none of them were his fault. They were miscommunication on some level. It might have been a bad route by the receiver. It might have just not read the defense correctly or the same way he did. So, I mean, that was all in the month of September, those were. So there was that adjustment period there. We're probably going to see it to some extent this year. We'll see if they go through that early season slump they went through last year and they've been prone to do in the past. But Jordan, I think in general, there is a lot to like about him. He's aggressive in terms of his willingness to push the ball downfield. His sense of timing and touch is really fantastic. It's so much of his game, Jordan, reminds me of what we saw coming out of Cal from Jared Goff. And that probably terrifies people when they think about what Goff was like this past week in St. Louis. But I think, again, you can go back to Goff being similar to Falk in terms of he's a timing quarterback, needs to be on the same page with his receivers. And really, that was a situation where that was never going to be the case as a rookie for Goff. Certainly stepping in the middle of the season for LA last year, and so that's something to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, he did. I mean, the accuracy and the touch, especially to like the intermediate level, really reminded me of Goff quite a bit. But there's a lot of stuff that Falk is doing. Like I said, like post snap, that's also really impressive. Like I said, he can manipulate defensive backs with his eyes. There's a lot of really subtle pocket movement, where he's just sliding a little bit here, left to his right, and creating a throwing lane. There's so much to like about the way that he is really impacting defenses, finding the open man, doing all these sort of things after the snap, under pressure. Again, just a lot of high-level quarterback play from him in the pocket that we necessarily haven't seen from everybody else in this class. When we were watching some of his film, his first quarter throws against Colorado really stood out to me. There was just a series of them in a row. I mean, he started out, he had this beautiful deep post while he was being driven into the ground by a defender, and it would have been a 78-yard touchdown pass that was dropped. And then he comes back on 3rd and 8 and throws a beautiful deep out to the far hash, with like accuracy, touch, and timing for a first down. And then he has a nice seam route for a touchdown over a linebacker between two DBs. And then he comes back a little bit later, throws a nice 9, deep route down the left sideline for a 25-yard gain. And then he follows it up a little bit later with a pump fake on a halfback wheel for a 46-yard touchdown. I mean, you're just seeing all these different types of throws from him in just one quarter. It was just a lot of really impressive throws and a lot of really high-level quarterback play from him, although we're definitely going to have some concerns going into the year.
Yeah, certainly the first thing that pops out is the arm strength. I don't think he has a huge arm.
Yeah.
That gets hidden a little bit because he's such a good timing. He's such a good spot thrower, is what I like to call it. He knows exactly the point where his wide receiver is supposed to get to, and he knows how long it takes him to make that throw. And so while he doesn't have a big arm, he's able to get the ball there in time. So really he can mitigate some of the issues he might have with that arm. I think there are times where maybe it's not so much the arm strength as he's so used to the timing and rhythm that he doesn't drive the ball when there are times that he really needs to. In particular, there are times between the hashes where he's trying to beat a linebacker or just in general trying to fit it into tight coverage where he really needs to put a little more mustard on the ball and he tends to float him a little bit. I don't know that that's always because he has a weak arm. I think there are just times where he's so used to being able to lay the ball in there, he doesn't put what he can on the ball.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, he doesn't have a big arm. Maybe it can get a little bit stronger. I think he has the necessary arm strength and necessary size to play in the NFL. But yeah, he doesn't necessarily have, a huge cannon for an arm. But the things that I did like, and we noticed it when we watched him. He has just a really good understanding of like football geometry. Like where guys are going to be, where open soft spots are. I mean, there again, just a sort of high level understanding of everything that's taking place around him. Again, we'd like to see him continue to progress and develop. It'll be interesting to see how he does without his top two wide receivers. I'd like to see him, hopefully, if he can get a little bit stronger, that would be nice too. I really think that the Senior Bowl is going to be a big opportunity for him, Josh, don't you think?
Oh, there's no question about that. And we talked about the weapons he has. What about the weapons he doesn't have? I love what he's able to do in terms of the arc he puts on the ball when he's throwing over that second level defender. It shows up repeatedly. When he's throwing in the end zone and just intermediate deep balls throughout. I can't wait to see him when he has some bigger targets because they really don't have, that big tight end stretching the seam. Yeah. That's certainly not the way that offense works.
That's a great point.
I think, and to even go so far as to kind of project, fit next year, gosh, you think about, yes, he's coming from a system where you probably want him to have a year to develop. What about going to LA? What about the Chargers? They've got that tight end who's in his second year, who's probably going to have I would argue he may have had a breakout year last year, Hunter Henry.
Mm-hmm.
But I would expect him to have a really big year this year with Phillip Rivers. I would love to see Luke Falk end up at a place like LA where he can learn under a guy like Rivers for a year. He's going to have big targets like Keenan Allen, Hunter Henry. And I just think that type of system really bodes well for the future of a player like him.
Yeah, that would be a great fit. I think he'd also fit well in Ken Wisenhunt's offense. So yeah, that would be a great fit. Yeah, so he's going to be a fun guy to watch in the whole draft process. As is his cross-state rival and our next quarterback on the list, Washington's Jake Browning. Now, Browning will be an underclassman, but he is draft eligible. So he could possibly declare. And this kid's been starting since he got onto campus, so he's got a ton of starting experience already. Even though this will be his third year as a starter. Really impressive play action passer. His QB rating of 142.8 on play action passes ranks number 2 among FBS quarterbacks, and he's got 14 touchdowns and 0 INTs coming off play action passes. But he also got to throw to John Ross last year, which would definitely helped him out there. He won't have that aspect this year. Now, the one thing that was really interesting with Browning that we noticed was his deep ball. So he can throw the deep ball with touch, and we saw some nice, deep passes. But then there's also, a lot of deep passes that we saw that just sort of hung in the air and just sort of left John Ross like hanging out there. And it looked like he definitely left some plays on the field with that deep ball. So we definitely like to see that get a little bit better.
Yeah, there's 2 particular stats that back that up as well. You look at the percentage of his yards in the air versus yards after the catch. 61.8% of his yards were through the air. That's the 7th most among returning FBS quarterbacks. And considering when you have a guy like John Ross who can take it to the distance at any time for anywhere on the field, that's really surprising that big a percentage of his yards is through the air. And I think part of that has to go back to the fact that he's hanging balls up there. The other point I want to make, and this is maybe the bigger one, 6 of his 9 interceptions on the season were on deep passes of 20 or more yards downfield. So that's another issue that he really needs to fix with that. Jordan, the biggest issue we saw with him really was the arm strength. I think it looked throughout the year. It didn't look very good. And quite frankly, it created more issues for him than we saw with Luke Falk, even though they may potentially have comparable arms because Falk had a better sense of timing than he does. But I think that was an issue throughout. And then come to find out, he actually hurt his throwing shoulder late in the season against Arizona State, played the championship game, played the playoff game against Alabama with a hurt, had surgery in January on it. So it'll be interesting to see how he recovers from that, if it makes it better or if it becomes an even bigger issue. But I think the big point in general is that while, yes, it was definitely apparent at the end of the year, we saw issues with that arm strength throughout the season.
Yeah, and that definitely is the big issue with Browning is the sort of lack of arm strength, and like you said, it was there all year, even prior to the injury, and after the injury, he really didn't fare well from a production standpoint. Arm strength issues aside, there's a ton to like about the kid. He's been playing since he basically got to campus, so nothing really gets to him. He doesn't really get rattled. He plays really well under pressure. He's got his PFF QB rating of 97.94 ranks number 7 among returning FBS quarterbacks. So he's been performing, like a top 10 quarterback in a lot of different ways in a lot of different areas. He could take snaps from under center, turn his back to the defense and play action. So he's been doing a lot of different things that a lot of other college quarterbacks don't do. But again, the one big knock on him would be, the arm strength issue. So, even though he is, draft eligible, I really think it'd be a good idea for Browning to stay in school and continue to, get more experience. Don't you think, Josh?
Yeah, and part of that is the class itself. Obviously, this is the 4th week where we've looked at 2 quarterbacks. So that's 8 right there that have some level of intrigue. And you and I keep talking back and forth about who are we going to look at next, and it's tough because there's so many other guys. There's probably 7, 8, 9, 10 more guys that we're interested to watch, and for a guy that has his level of arm strength, that really, as of right now, would probably, if we're being honest, might put him into day 3 territory. It really doesn't make sense unless he just has a monster year. He comes back off surgery, and all of a sudden he's got a bigger, stronger tomato, and it's completely different. It really doesn't make sense for him to be coming out with such a big class this year.
No, I know. Maybe he'll get the Henry Rowan Gardner arm surgery thing, and it'll become back even stronger.
There you go.
What was that? Rookie of the Year? Is that the name of that movie?
Something like that. Yeah.
So yeah, maybe his arm.
I went with the bigger, better tomato route, but yeah, that works too.
So yeah, who knows? I mean, like maybe. His arm will be even stronger, next year, and he can put all those concerns to bed, and we can move on to something else to pick apart about his game. But again, his after the injury, his grades, again, didn't play well against Colorado. He didn't play well against Alabama last couple games. But again, smart kid, plays really well in the red zone too. I really like the way he can improvise in the red zone. That really stood out to me when watching this film.
Mm-hmm. One other point that I want to make on him, especially versus Falk, who you talked about, did such a good job of manipulating the pocket, moving around to create throwing lanes. That's an issue Browning has. That was something pointed out to me by Ben Stockwell. We were doing some other off-season training stuff, is that he really, at the top of the drop, he'll drift a little bit off his spot, and that ends up creating rush lanes on the outside that shouldn't be there, that kind of hangs his tackles out to dry. And so that's something I want to look for this year as well, is can he improve staying on his spot at the top of the drop, because that's going to help him do a number of things, but certainly it's going to help his linemen keep him clean.
Yeah. All right. Now, so let's move on. We are still discussing the 2018 draft, but it is time, Josh, for you to discuss one of your my guys.
Yeah. Well, first off, this is my guy because he might have the early lead in terms of best name in this coming draft and potential draft class. That's South Carolina's Deebo Samuel.
What you got on this 40, Josh?
Yeah, it's fast, right? I'm not keeping up with him. I know that. And you know how fast I am.
Never mind. I was making a Friday reference.
It's been so long since I've seen Friday.
You're an old parent now.
I'm not Ben Stockwell poor with the cultural references, but Friday, you got me on that one. I'm not going to get Friday. Okay. So, but yeah, if we are going to talk about his speed, he's just an absolutely explosive athlete. He's smooth. He gets to top speed in a flash, which I absolutely love from wide receiver. It's one thing if you're running fast with the ball, but if you're running routes at full speed, you're really putting defensive backs in a tough position, and I think Deebo does a great job of that. His change of direction is excellent. He does a good job of making defenders miss in the open field. He forced 18 missed tackles in the last 8 games of last season, so that's right up there in that span with just about everybody in the country. One of the other important
like Carlos
stats
Henderson range.
Yeah, that's pretty solid. That's again. Yeah. That's top 5 or 6 in the country, and I kind of expect him to build off that finish, if you want to call it 8 games of finish, but because that's most of the season. But that's where he was at last year. Also, his hands, fantastic. Just 2 drops last year on 61 catchable targets. That's 3.28 drop rate. That's 8th among returning wide receivers. So he's excellent as far as that goes. Has a bit of a slight frame. He measured this spring, I think, at about 5'11", 208, but really he doesn't look super thin on the hoof, and he's real competitive with the ball in the air, so I think he's okay in that regards. Yes, he's not your big 6'3" guy, but when you're that kind of an athlete, you don't expect him to be the super tall player either. So I think there's a lot to like with him. South Carolina obviously has a young quarterback. going to be in his second year. I think this could be a huge year for Deebo Samuel, and I think I really, really like him. I think he's going to be in the conversation when you're talking about early day two. Maybe even if he has a huge year, he could sneak into that first round discussion because that's the level of athlete he is. And when you're talking about a big time athlete at wide receiver with the type of elusiveness he has and the hands he has, that's kind of the complete package.
Awesome. Yeah. And it's, at least at this point, I wouldn't say that it looks like it's going to be a loaded wide receiver class.
No, I would agree with you there. I've looked at probably 15 or 16 of them so far, and I would definitely put him in the top 2 or 3 that I've looked at. So I like him better. I'll say this. I probably like him right now better off of 2016 film than what I thought of James Washington from Oklahoma State, who is probably universally thought of as one of the top guys in this draft. So I like Deebo Samuel quite a bit.
Yeah, it sounds like it. All right. Well, good to know. Yeah, so we have a weak wide receiver class coming up, and like we mentioned, a strong quarterback class coming up in the 2018 draft. All right, now latest time we're going to go back to the 2017 NFL draft, and we're going to go inside some war rooms where we discuss and examine what went behind their picks. And we are going to start off today with the Los Angeles Rams, Josh, GM Les Snead and their new coach, Sean McVay. So they're giving a really interesting sort of chemistry. It's in a working relationship already. These guys, it's pretty impressive to watch in their pressers. Like I said, they really seem to get along well. They have a really good system going there with the way that they're scouting and the way they're involving coaches with the picks. So it's really interesting to see. This was Les's 6th draft there, and I think he just keeps, adding more sort of people to the process and sort of making everyone feel more inclusive. He did say that they have 2 analytics nerds in the draft room with him, so that's always a good story. They in the
draft room, not in their mom's basement.
No, yeah. He said that there's this very specific spot where the 2 nerds sit. Inside the war room there, so they do use analytics, heavily in their draft plans. So it sounds like he really values the coaching staff, and their input, and he really gets it also not only in leading up to it, but also, the day of the draft and while they're dealing with these picks, he's really going around and getting the input from people. So that was really interesting to see. One thing that I thought was really interesting too with that is when they get to around day 3, they bring in, Coach Fossil, the special teams coach, and he basically has to sign off on everybody that gets drafted from that point because they basically have to be able to play special teams. So, I thought that was really interesting too, that, the coaches again are so heavily involved now in the players that get picked there.
Doesn't that in particular just make a ton of sense, though? Because ultimately, your day 3 picks, you're not expecting those guys to start right away. Inevitably, there's going to be a couple of starters throughout the league that are on day 3, but that's not the expectation. In order to maximize those picks and get early return, those guys need to play special teams. So it makes perfect sense that they want Fossil to sign off on all those picks.
Yeah, and the other thing that was kind of interesting is they would basically decide before the pick if they were doing offense or defense. Like Les would be like, okay, we're going to go offense. They knew with pick 37 they were going to go an offensive skill guy. They wanted a tight end or a wide receiver. They wanted to get some more weapons for Goff. So they knew that they were basically going to go that route. So they actually said they'd been targeting Gerald Everett, who they ended up taking at 37. So I just think it's really interesting how he's basically targeting one side of the ball before picks and then getting the coach's input, about that. I just thought that was an interesting way to go about it. It really seems like almost like a 50-50 feel to it. Well, not necessarily 50-50, but I would say, just very, very, heavily takes everyone else's input into consideration.
Yeah, one of the other parts of their process that they made a point many times in terms of being really important to them was the Senior Bowl. Les talked about, he said, if you stand out at the Senior Bowl, you usually have a good NFL career. Mm-hmm. We look at the 2 small school kids they had, certainly Cooper Kupp, both of them went to Eastern Washington. Him and Ebukam, the defensive end. But Cooper Kupp was one of the absolute stars of that week at the Senior Bowl. He was fantastic. And so you see him at the combine and he doesn't run fast, and that scares people off. But you have him once or twice a year at Eastern Washington working against D1 guys. And then you see how he torched everybody at the Senior Bowl against a higher level of competition. And the Rams really value that. And that certainly comes throughout their draft.
Yeah, that was a big deal for them, and they mentioned that. And then the other thing that, and especially it happened with Kupp and with Everett, like they want to have private workouts with these guys and Coach McVay, because Coach McVay basically wants to see these guys move with his eyes and make sure that they have, what he wants for his offense. Because what he's really valuing is guys who can move well and create separation. That's really what he's looking for. So he wants these guys, and so he wants to see it with his own two eyes. And I don't really blame him, but again, it's going to be kind of a bit of a tell for who the Rams are interested in. If you heard that, Coach McVay did a private workout with a wide receiver or a tight end, that should be singing off alarms in your head.
Yeah, that's kind of the opposite of what we talked about with Seattle last week with Postage, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because that was a guy that they targeted all along, wouldn't let the O-line coach meet with him because they wanted to be secretive. Now, a lot of times that kind of thing can just be based on the individual player. Maybe they just felt like they had a real good handle on Postage beforehand, and they're more of the mindset that the Rams are. But that's interesting that the Rams aren't necessarily concerned about, the appearances with those workouts. They put so much value in them that they're willing to kind of potentially expose a little bit of their game plan.
Yeah, like I said, and again, it's really that offensive thing, and it's really just McVay feeling happy with the guys for his scheme. This is very scheme-centric, team now with McVay on one side and Phillips on the other side, mm-hmm. and they want to try to get, the players to fit both of those sides of the ball. Now, with their first pick, they took Gerald Everett, and they referred to him as a perimeter player. We would just call him like a move tight end, but they referred to him as a perimeter player, which I thought was interesting, which means that they're probably really going to be splitting him out wide, and using him, as sort of like an X role at times. And this is basically the way that this guy can move with his size made him really attractive to Sean McVay. This was Sean McVay's basically favorite player in the draft. They had him in for a private individual workout the week before the draft. This was, again, the guy that they really wanted, and this is the guy that they got. So, they're really happy about that. He can separate, he can catch the football. So they mentioned his, Senior Bowl dominance as verification that he could play at a high level. Again, this is the guy they really, really liked and went after and got.
Yeah, I think ultimately you talked about it at the top of this segment, how important it was for them to get Jared Goff weapons, and certainly they got a good start with that with Gerald Everett. I also, going back to our conversation about Luke Falk, similar quarterbacks, those timing rhythm guys that could really use the big body targets that can catch the ball that might appear a little bit off target, but it's really a matter of throwing him open. And I think Everett's going to provide that for Goff. That's going to be a huge boost for him, no question.
Yeah, and then they double dipped there basically in with their next pick, and got the aforementioned Cooper Kupp from Eastern Washington, and they don't necessarily see him as just a slot. They see him as someone who can play out wide, but also someone who can play in the slot and can really excel in the slot, because they view him as having a really polished, well-rounded skill set, but they sort of view it the best of his skills as being things that he can exploit from inside. Like Sean McVay said, he really understands route distribution. He's always got a plan at the line of scrimmage about how he's going to work against different coverages and where the holes are in that coverage. So I think he could be a really good slot weapon for Goff, don't you think?
Yeah, and again, I keep harping on this, but we're talking about what the strengths are of Goff. And going back to college, that was understanding where the defense is, how to throw guys open. And that's kind of the same thing we're talking about with Kupp here. He gets that as well. McVay talked about his above the neck approach in terms of the way he sees the game from the quarterback's perspective. They're going to be able to build a chemistry between those two, and I think that's going to be a really solid connection in the long term, regardless of Kupp's athletic ability, because really it's more about, again, what he does from the neck up than what he does from the legs on down.
Yeah, and they really liked, the Kupp from the neck up. They thought he was, again, really polished, but the things that they really, he had to be sold on drafting a wide receiver from Eastern Washington. And the things that really sold them on it was, again, they mentioned the Senior Bowl, like you said, Josh, I mean, he tore up, the practices and the one-on-ones. And then they also mentioned, like his games against like top FBS competition and specifically his performances against Washington's Budda Baker and Marcus Peters, as, again, proof on tape that he could do it. And then they saw it in Mobile that he could do it, and then, private workouts and things like that. So again, they really like Kupp, and he's one of those guys who could probably make a pretty quick impact with them.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the case. And again, when you have a young quarterback like that and you want to build a chemistry, I think we can fully expect to see plenty of Cooper Kupp this year, even though I think the general consensus would normally be, small school wide receiver prospect, going to take time to develop. No, I kind of expect it to be a quick transition because they're going to want him to be up to speed as quick as possible with Jared Goff. That wasn't the only receiver that they took. Obviously, you could argue whether or not Everett's really a receiver or tight end. We talked about that a little bit. But they also took Josh Reynolds a little bit later in the draft, a guy with great ball skills, longer guy. He has a huge catch radius, which, again, that works great with Goff because if you've got a guy bearing down in the front, he might throw it a little bit behind you just to, A, protect you, B, put it more in your range where the defender can't get to it.
He's great at that, yeah.
Yeah, and another guy that had a really big Senior Bowl performance. So it was interesting to see them double or even triple dip there. And there's a broader point I want to make to that, Jordan. You look today, we're recording this on Tuesday. I'm not sure if it's going to go up Tuesday or Wednesday. But over in Detroit, it was announced that Taylor Decker had shoulder surgery. And they might be without him for a little bit of time. And the reason I bring that up is this. We talked throughout, certainly last week, we talked about it with Seattle double, triple dipping in terms of defensive backs in such a deep class. It was certainly what we would consider a deep class for wide receiver this year, and we see the Rams doing the same. Now, obviously, they had a need, but one of the reasons you do that is because you can't predict the future. You don't know if Cooper Kupp's going to be healthy the whole time. You don't know if Gerald Everett's going to be able to make a quick transition. He's a small school guy too. So if you have a deep class, double, triple dip on these positions, make sure you get guys that are able to play. Detroit, one of the things I think that's going to come to fruition there, if Taylor Decker doesn't pay or just can't play right away, we're probably going to see Dahl from Washington State, who we liked a lot. And Steve Palazzolo compared him coming out to David Bakhtiari in terms of him being a top athlete, really good feet. Maybe not as good against bull rushes and needs to get stronger, but that's the kind of player he was as a tackle. Last year, Detroit played him at guard because they had a need there and kind of went through a number of guys inside. But I have a feeling Dahl's going to have a real chance at starting at left tackle from them up until Taylor Decker is able to go. And I think potentially that's going to end up being a very low-key, huge move for Detroit that they did that. And who knows? We could end up seeing a similar thing with Seattle. We talked about how Seattle had issues at safety when either of those two went down, and now they have two really good young prospects that we like at safety that could potentially fill in if they have injury issues. Who knows? You could see a similar thing in St. Louis where one of those top two guys comes down and all of a sudden Josh Reynolds is coming in. I called him. How many times are we going to do that this year?
No, but I hear you with the double dipping, and the Rams, the Rams double dipped on the defensive side of the ball too in this draft with pass rushers. They
Yep, they sure did.
they took their last pick was the Ejuan Price from Pitt, sort of undersized edge rusher, and then they also took the other Eastern Washington kid, Samson Ebicom. So I was sort of laughing that they took the two Eastern Washington kids. So some poor Ram scout got stuck with the bleeding eyes from watching that red field for a lot of hours upon hours. But Ebicom was a player that really stood out to a bunch of our analysts this year when we did the Eastern Washington games. Again, we weren't even really looking for him to stand out, but he really did. There's a bunch of us going, hey, this Ebicom guy can play. But yeah, we see him as like, sort of an outside linebacker, edge rusher. They see him as a Sam or Will in addition to special teams. Really athletic and really chase things down. They like that. And then they also took another defensive player that we like too in Tanzel Smart, Josh, that we also saw at the Senior Bowl.
Yeah, and he has some versatility. He can play nose or tackle. He could play a little bit of defensive end. I wouldn't be shocked if on run heavy downs or maybe goal line packages you saw him playing outside a little bit. Leslie, here's a quote from him. I remember thinking on the sideline in Mobile, of course, he was a Senior Bowl guy, who is this guy from Tulane? Because he seems to be in the backfield a lot. And he's right. He was all over the place. He certainly made a name for himself there. He graded out really well for us throughout the season. A lot of that is due to his quickness, but he's a really productive player. The defensive line coach talked about long arms, good hands, so he kind of fits that prototype of what you're looking for in a defensive interior player that can play all over. I think he's a guy that's going to be able to make a pretty big impact on what's already a very strong defensive line.
Totally agree. And then going forward, so sort of forecasting them for the upcoming draft, again, things to look for. Coach McVay is going to hold private workouts for the wide receivers or tight ends they might draft. They're really heavily going to factor Senior Bowl week production into their evaluations and who they pick. They're really going to involve the coaching staff in which players they take and what needs they address. And I also really think that I really expect them to try to get another corner at some point for Wade Phillips' defense. Don't you think, Josh?
Yeah, I think that's going to have to happen at some point. But look, they had a lot of holes to fill, and first and foremost, they had to get weapons for their young quarterback who struggled last year. They have to get guys that they see fit for him long term to have the best chance for that franchise to succeed. And ultimately they did that. And they improved the defensive line too. That's something we talk about all the time, where if you aren't getting secondary players and you want to improve your secondary, but maybe wherever you're at in the draft, the value's not there, beef up that defensive line. I mean, they certainly, obviously, they have Aaron Donald, Robert Quinn when he's healthy and going full bore, but continue to beef up that defensive line. That makes easier for, obviously, them to pass rush. That gives the defensive backs less time to have to cover as well. So that was their approach to it, and that could end up paying off for them as well on that end, regardless of them needing another body in that secondary.
Yeah, and then now we are going to move on to the Los Angeles Chargers. Try not to say San Diego.
Yeah, it's going to happen.
Yeah. So the Chargers, one of the things that I thought could be a possibility for them was drafting a Phillip Rivers replacement, because he's not getting any younger. They really didn't seem to be concerned about it, Josh. Like even like watching the pressers with Telesco, it doesn't seem like it's really a concern, possibly even for this next upcoming draft. I really think that they feel internally in that building that Rivers has a couple years left. So since they didn't go about trying to get his replacement, it almost seems like they went around trying to get the best, pieces to put around him. They ended up taking and, double dipping, like you like, Josh.
Yeah, they did. Real quick on them looking short term over long term before we get into where they double dipped a couple different places. I wonder if some of that may have been conscious or subconscious, because this regime's been there a little bit and they haven't really been winning. So they're, as mediocre and below average as they've been, there's still going to be an emphasis on them needing to win now. So in terms of developing guys long term, that's not necessarily what they're looking for. They need to win some right now. Obviously, they have a quarterback that has potential to be able to do that. So to try and get him help, the single biggest issue that they've had the last couple of years is offensive line. And that is where they double dipped. And really, they got possibly the two best guards in the draft in Forrest Lamp from Western Kentucky and Dan Feeney from Indiana.
Yeah, we loved both these guys.
Both guys on day two. Yeah, there's a lot to like about him. First off, on Forrest Lamp, they talked about how Telesco talked about how he can probably at some point play all five positions up front.
Yep.
And they've had tons of injury problems in the past. So it's one of those guys where you find a spot for him. Initially, it looks like they're probably going to try and play him at guard to start off with. Mm-hmm. But you have problems elsewhere. Maybe he just ends up playing better elsewhere. That's fine. You know you have a starter in that. Dan Feeney, one of the absolute standouts the last couple of years at right guard, ended up having to play a little bit of right tackle himself this past season at Indiana. But I think he's a much better right guard, and you look at statistically, he was just an absolute lockdown pass protector the last couple of years from that position too. So again, going back to helping Phillip Rivers out, they talked about his toughness, blue collar attitude, although they do think he's a solid athlete, and I would tend to agree with that. Has the hands, he's a finisher. Shout out to Mike Renner. But and they also think there could be a little bit of versatility with him as well. Telesco talked about him potentially being a center down the road, wanting to play him at right guard right now. But I think they've really hit home runs with both of those guys there, Jordan.
Oh, yeah. Again, these are Forrest Lamp. We were really high. PFF was really high on Forrest Lamp, and we totally agree with Telesco. That was a player that in the pre-draft process, we said could probably play, almost all five spots, at least multiple spots, because he had already shown he could play tackle at a high level. A lot of people projected him to play guard. He'd played guard. He played some guard at the Senior Bowl as well. So again, a guy who could, do both of those things. So they got, like you said, Josh, just a tremendous player that they could plug in, somewhere right now. Let's just say left guard, and then maybe he could move to, to center in a year, or move to tackle in 2 years. He can, move it to different spots. And again, I know, and I'm not saying it's easy for an offensive lineman to move positions like that, because it's clearly not, and that's what makes him so special. And then in Feeney, like you said, Feeney was just so good. For so long, and again, a talented guard, but someone that they could possibly move to center. So they really just reshaped their whole, interior offensive line, with those picks. And they even took another offensive lineman, later in the draft, when they took Sam Tevy for the right tackle from Utah to sort of add some more tackle depth. So again, you had mentioned it earlier, Josh. I agree with you. They are in sort of win now mode, because they're going to a new market. You can't be going into LA.
That's a great point.
Yeah, saying, hey, everybody, we're going to rebuild. You know what I mean? Like, you're in a competition for butts and seats, and you're competing with the beach. And that's some pretty tough competition. So, again, a lot of good pieces to help them win now with Lamp and with Feeney, and Tevy. And then, we can't forget too, with their first round pick, they took, the talented wide receiver, Mike Williams.
Yeah. And I think he fits the win now perspective. A lot of times wide receivers takes them a little bit to translate, but when you think of what Mike Williams does best, boy, does that really fit with Phillip Rivers, or what? Really his ability to go get the tough ball, that 50-50, to use his size, his athletic ability, his physicality, something that they all talked about, Telesco in particular. That fits so well when you think historically of when Rivers has been at his best, is when he's had those big, huge receivers on the outside he could just throw the ball up to. And so he hasn't had that for a couple of years.
That's a good point.
I think Williams is going to bring that for them. And I think there's potential that he's going to make a very immediate contribution as long as he can get healthy and on the field.
Yeah, right. It's a good point. Williams, if you think about it, Mike Williams and Hunter Henry, that's especially in the red zone, that's a pretty nice pair of weapons.
That's a great combo.
And you mentioned it too. Rivers has the confidence in his arm and the ability to just, put the ball where he needs to put it and let guys like that go get it. Switching to the other side of the ball, they have Gus Bradley there now, so they're going to go with that, Seahawk cover 3 heavy scheme that, that Bradley's been running for years. So they brought in Rayshawn Jenkins as sort of that strong safety, guy who can come down into the box and be that extra defender and also to play special teams. But they liked his speed, his size, his production. But really, that sort of physical striking ability is really what they, like, again, to fill that strong safety spot in that defense.
Yeah, I think when you look at Jenkins, you look at Desmond King, who they also took, and you think about Gus Bradley saying his ability to arrive in a bad mood, talking about Rayshawn Jenkins. That kind of fits with Bradley and his attitude in terms of really high tempo, really upbeat just naturally. And it makes sense to get guys that are physical and competitive on the back end like that. I thought that was really telling that they picked a couple guys that really play with the personality of the new coach there.
Yeah, Gus is pretty intense guy, but
yes, he is.
Yeah, and you mentioned Desmond King. They think he's a corner who could play outside, but they also think he could play nickel and even possibly some safety. So they do like his versatility. I think they see him in a lot of different roles, more so compared to Jenkins, who I think they sort of already have pegged. But again, like they loved King's production. They loved his versatility. They loved his ball skills. They thought he had a knack for turning the ball over, and then they also mentioned his return ability. One thing, Josh, that I want to mention, and Tom Telesco mentioned this about almost every one of the draft picks, so it clearly resonated with me, and it clearly is important to them, is he really places an emphasis on how many years these guys started for. Like he almost mentioned everybody, like, Desmond King, 4-year starter, he said. Dan Feeney, 4-year starter. Forrest Lamp, 4-year starter. So that to me seems like it's something that's really important to them when they're doing the evaluation process is, how long did a player keep up this, level of play? What's his body of work look like? So I just thought that was really telling that they just kept constantly mentioning that someone was, a 3 or 4-year starter.
Yeah, and I think, again, that goes back to my expectation that they really are looking toward winning now, both for a new city and just for their jobs, really. I think maybe again, it's a little bit subconscious, but my guess is there's a feeling that if these guys played that many snaps, that many years, have that much experience at the college level, they're probably going to have an easier transition to the next level. They're probably going to be able to help us now. And I just think that was a huge point of emphasis for all of them in this draft.
Yeah, I guess, you got a shorter learning curve, in addition to also, having the fact that it's been sort of proven on film and that proven production. Yeah, so, looking ahead for the Los Angeles Chargers, like you said, they have to win now, but they still have to get a quarterback for the future. So, like I said, even though it might not even happen next year, though, Josh. Like I said, the way that they came off in their post-draft pressers was that it's really not a priority for them. I think they really think that Phillip's got some gas left. So, it might be the sort of situation again next year where, they do this again, where they're really trying to get a bunch of polished players who can go now, be in that win now mode to, again, put butts in seats in LA and really start making some people Chargers fans. They're also going to really draft for Gus Bradley's scheme. So, that'll be something that we got to keep in mind, when we're looking at these, players for them next year. We're going to be looking for long corners and, and players like that. So again, that'll be something that we have to keep in mind for that. Again, interesting teams, Chargers and Rams. Hope they can both gain some ground in that LA market. And that is it, Josh, for the 2017 draft. And now we are going to move on to the draft memory, Josh. And this time it's my draft memory. You had a wonderful draft memory of Millen's denim overalls, which I wish I could say I'm wearing right now, but I'm not wearing denim overalls. But I will bring those back, Josh. And I'm disappointed that you haven't sent me any yet. I have not received.
Yeah, that sounds like a threat.
I have not received any Amazon packs. It is a threat because I'm going to wear it with no shirt like Vince Wilfork. I'll look good. Maybe I'll barbecue some stuff.
I don't know who makes them. We could use some sponsors. Someone's got to chip in, right?
Yeah, I don't know. Is that Oshkosh? Does Oshkosh, do they make them for like normal human size, or is that just for the small humans? I don't even know.
I have no idea. I am not up on my overalls.
What do you mean you don't know? You have a small human. I don't even have a small human.
I'll tell you what. I'll spend this week hanging out with #overall Twitter, and we'll figure it out. We'll get to the bottom of this for you.
All right. Okay, so getting to my draft memory. So I had mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that today is the 12th anniversary of the day that I got back from 6-month deployment in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. Again, very, very happy to be here now and not doing that stuff. So just a little backstory. It's 2005. We're leading up to the draft of 2005. I'm on the ship, which was the USS Bonhomme Richard, which is French for Good Man Richard. It was Benjamin Franklin's pen name way back in the day. Anyways, huge ship. 844 feet long, very big. We are coming back out of the Gulf. We've been in the Gulf for about 3 months. So it is April 10th. April 18th. And the draft is April 23rd. So it's April 18th, and we are leaving the Straits of Hormuz. Transiting that. I'm very excited. Our Marines are back on board. We're out of the Gulf. I've got all my fingers and all my toes. I'm happy and just grateful, and we're headed back home. Unbeknownst to me, on April 10th, some Somali pirates had hijacked a freighter, and we're holding it for ransom, off the coast of Somalia. And first of all, no, Josh, it's not the Tom Hanks one. Tom Hanks was not there. It was not that one. It's not that movie. So all of a sudden, we get a call that we have to go down there and take care of that. So I'm like, oh, are you serious? Now I got to go down and deal with Somali pirates? So during the whole sort of prep, for the last couple of days up to the draft, so I'm sitting there floating off the coast of Somalia, dealing with this whole pirate issue. And we had, we flew some gentlemen on board the ship with very particular sets of skills. And, we were sort of planning a particular operation in case, particularly, we had to take back the tanker. So I don't want to get into too much of the details of it, but so there was, these gentlemen came on board, and I was sort of involved in the operation, but no, I'm not spec war, so I wasn't involved in like the active part, more of a support role. But I had to go to these briefings for this thing, and I'm sitting in this briefing, and there's a guy, and every time that he would mention the word pirates, I would giggle and I would cover one eye and I would go, pirates. And, because I like pirates, Josh. Pirates are my jam. I like Pirates of the Caribbean. So I was, so I would kept doing that every time this guy was trying to give this legit briefing. I kept saying pirates. So eventually someone said, Plucker, one more time and you're out of here. So I almost got kicked out of the briefing for talking like a pirate. But yeah, so that was, something that, again, I had to deal with.
Did they end up putting you on the megaphone when you ran into the pirates so that you could, because you're the one speaking their language?
No, it wasn't.
Arr, hand over the freighter, mateys.
No, I didn't have to do anything like that. And we actually ended up, the operation ended up not being a go. We ended up leaving after a while. I don't forget how long we were there for. And I didn't really even know what ended up taking place. I actually had to look it up like years down the road, but the people who owned it actually ended up paying the ransom for it, $315,000 for that ship. So, but yeah, that was my draft memory, floating off the coast of Somalia, dealing with Somali pirates during the 2005 NFL draft. I'm sorry, Somali pirates during the 2005 NFL draft. Like I said, Josh, very excited to be back here and healthy and safe and be doing draft stuff with you. I much prefer doing draft work than pirate work. And so now, Josh, that we've discussed my draft memory, it is now time for the world famous draft time machine, Josh.
Time machine.
The draft time machine. All right, Josh. So now, last week, we got in the draft time machine. We did some crazy stuff in the draft time machine last week, Josh. You had us changing 3 picks each for the
We
Raiders.
did.
You're nuts, man.
We redrafted the Raiders 2009, didn't we? Just completely redrafted it.
You're crazy. But I mean, like, you just, I'm always trying to be somewhat conservative with the space-time continuum and maybe make like one small change here, but no, you just blew the whole thing up, man.
No, let's go for it.
Yeah, the time police are after you. Anyways, so now I have a feeling, Josh, I grew up an Arizona Cardinal fan, so I'm going to set the dial on this time machine to 2007, Josh.
Yeah.
So now, we're talking about 2006, where the Cardinals had drafted a certain left-handed quarterback from USC with their first-round pick, who I thought was going to go to your Lions, but did not. Ended up going to the Cardinals, Mr. Matt Leinart.
Championship.
So now, in the 2007 NFL draft, one of the Cardinals' big priorities was protecting Matt Leinart. And so they thought, okay, well, let's look at this draft. Well, we have some pretty talented running back here, this guy named Adrian Peterson. But you know what? We get burned when we draft running backs in the first round. Garrison Hurst in 93, and he didn't do anything until after he left. And Thomas Jones in 2000, he didn't do anything until after he left. So I think with the running back failures fresh in their mind and wanting to protect the blind side of a left-handed quarterback with a mauling right tackle, the Cardinals took Levi Brown. But I'm not going to do that, Josh. I am going to change this pick, and now the Arizona Cardinals are going to select from Oklahoma running back Adrian Peterson, Josh.
Yeah.
Championship.
I remember this one too in terms of that was kind of the guys that everyone thought they were between all along, that Levi Brown could end up going there. Was Peterson worth that? Could he stay healthy? There were some health concerns with him. Everybody knew he was a dynamic talent. Obviously, it panned out immediately for Minnesota, for them taking Adrian Peterson. Not so much for your Cardinals. So this is very interesting. And I heard when we were doing draft prep, prep for the podcast, and we were talking about this, and I just heard the wind come out of your sails when I said this, but I can't help but think about their Super Bowl against Pittsburgh and think that if they had Adrian Peterson.
Oh, hold on a second, Josh. La 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 la. I can't hear you talk about this, Josh.
I hate to tell you, but he's probably the difference, man. They're as close as they came. If they had Adrian Peterson instead of Levi Brown, oh my goodness. They're winning the Super Bowl there.
I still can't watch that game. I will refuse to watch that last play. I won't watch that game. But I think you're right, because at that point it's not even Leinart that's playing anymore. It's Kurt Warner that's playing quarterback.
Yeah.
And and Kurt was so adept at getting rid of the ball, identifying what the defense is doing pre-snap, getting rid of the ball quickly, especially if blitzes came or whatever. So, I mean, they didn't really even, Levi, I'm not saying they didn't need good tackle help, they could have always used tackle help, but, Kurt Warner's back there sort of, negated some of that somewhat. But then to be able to hand it to Adrian Peterson, okay, yeah. I don't even want to think about that. Okay, so Josh, so how would that impact the rest of, some of the later picks then, if the Cardinals took Adrian Peterson there instead of Levi Brown?
Oh, this board is going all over the place with this one. There's all kinds of fun. So first off, what's Minnesota going to do? I don't think they're taking Levi Brown. Let's say that they stick at running back, because there's another one that's still on the board at that point that ended up being a pretty good running back. It went just a couple picks later, number 12 overall to Buffalo. That'd be Marshawn Lynch.
You're talking about beast mode?
Beast mode going to Minnesota. So that's hardly a consolation prize. Minnesota still getting a very, very good running back that I think is going to make them just as competitive as they were with Adrian Peterson in his prime. So that ends up working out okay for Minnesota. Not as big a deal, but what's Buffalo going to do now? Buffalo is they've got a bit of a mess. I don't think there's another running back there. Obviously, Lynch had some issues there to the point where they're willing to let him go out to Seattle. But at the same time, that kind of affects Buffalo both in 2007 and down the road, doesn't it, Jordan?
Yeah, and then also just sort of like wondering too, like where Levi falls to. I'm thinking maybe he stops at Atlanta and Atlanta takes him instead of, Jamal. So, I don't know. The whole thing sort of tumbles. Like you said, I think Minnesota ends up still being in a pretty good spot there with, they still get the bruising productive back for years to come. But, the Cardinals get Adrian Peterson. Woohoo! All right. And like you said, that may have resulted in a Cardinals Super Bowl, which means one less trophy for Pittsburgh. Which maybe means, I don't even know at that point. I don't know if Ken Wisenhunt would still be here or not. I'm not sure, but I mean, that definitely, once you win a Super Bowl, that just changes everything. Well, actually, I wouldn't know because the Cardinals haven't won one. But, yeah, so that again, Adrian Peterson now on the Cardinals, thanks to my handy dandy draft time machine. All right, Josh, that's going to do it for this episode. Again, as always, you guys can find the other episodes either on iTunes or however you find these podcasts, or you can find them on the website. Also on the website at profootballfocus.com/subscriptions, you can find all the info about PFF Edge, which, like I said, it unlocks all the premium articles, player grades, snap counts, draft pass, which is Josh and my baby, Jeff Ratcliffe's fantasy stuff, PFF projected box scores, and more. And Josh, what about Elite?
Elite, again, you're getting signature stats. You're getting the award-winning fantasy football analysis tools. It's worth $200. If you enter to win, leave that review in iTunes for us. Again, include your email, include your Twitter handle, and you'll have that shot to win.
Woohoo! All right, everybody. See you next week. We'll talk about some more QBs.